The steam isn't just heat. It's breath warm from something still alive beneath the earth. My name is Micah Greywind, and I've been a park ranger for just over 8 years, most of them here in Yellowstone. If you've never been here, it's hard to explain the way this land breathes. People talk about the wildlife, the mountains, the geysers, but those are just the postcards. What you can't capture in a photograph is the sense that the ground itself is alive. It shifts, it exhales, it groans. I've seen tourists get dizzy from the heat waves rolling off the hot springs. I've watched steam curl out of cracks in the earth like the park is whispering to itself. And I've heard stories, plenty of them, from locals, old rangers, and people who've lived near this land their whole lives. They all say the same thing: respect it, or it will take something from you. This particular evening was in late September. The days were cooling fast, but the earth here never really lets you forget there's fire under your feet. The sun was leaning low, the sky that strange mix of orange and bruised purple you only get when the air turns crisp. I was assigned to a late patrol along the lower geyser basin, checking the boardwalks and making sure no one decided to step off and play daredevil near the hot springs. By the time I reached one of the less traveled loops, a narrow wooden path circling a series of smaller pools, the place was deserted. The only sounds were the occasional hiss of steam vents and the quiet creak of the boardwalk under my boots. My flashlight was clipped to my belt, though I didn't need it yet. That's when I saw the steam ahead of me shift. Now, that might not sound like much steam moves all the time, but this wasn't the usual lazy drift. It was sudden, deliberate, like a curtain being drawn aside. Behind it, in the orange-pink light of the setting sun, I caught the faintest shapes. Not the shapes of trees, not rock formations. Human shapes. At first, I thought maybe I'd stumbled on a group of tourists who'd wandered off the path. But as I walked forward, the figures didn't move. They stood motionless, their outlines blurred by the mist curling off the pools. I called out, "Hello? You're not supposed to be in there, it's dangerous." The words seemed to vanish into the steam. I took another few steps, my boots echoing on the boardwalk. The shadows didn't react. I could see just enough to tell there were maybe 3, maybe 4 of them, all standing close to the edge of one of the pools. Too close. I knew from experience that the crust around these features could crumble like paper underfoot. I unclipped my flashlight and flicked it on, aiming the beam straight into the mist. That's when I noticed something that stopped me cold. The beam didn't just cut through the fog, it seemed to bend around the figures, like the light didn't want to touch them. Their edges shimmered, almost boiling, the way hot air distorts the horizon. I took a slow breath. "All right, folks," I said, forcing authority into my voice. "You need to step back toward the boardwalk. Now." They didn't move. The steam rolled between us again, thicker now, and for a moment I lost sight of them entirely. When it thinned, there were more. 5, 6, 7. They stood in a loose half-circle, all facing me. I couldn't see faces, just faint ovals of pale light where faces should have been. The temperature seemed to drop despite the heat coming off the pools. My skin prickled. Every instinct told me to leave, but I took another step. The boardwalk groaned under my weight. I aimed the flashlight at the ground ahead to make sure I wasn't stepping off onto unstable earth. That's when I saw them, wet footprints, bare, human-sized, and steaming in the cool air. They led from the boardwalk into the pool where the first 3 figures had stood. My throat tightened. The water in that pool was hot enough to kill a man in seconds. I looked back up. They were closer, not by much, just a few feet, but enough that I knew they hadn't made a sound when they moved. The mist curled tighter around them now, like it was clinging to their forms. One of them tilted its head slightly, like it was studying me. That broke something in me. I took a step back, then another. My flashlight beam flickered once, then steadied. I didn't take my eyes off them. "Okay," I said quietly, more to myself than to them. "You win." But when I turned to retreat, the path behind me was gone. The boardwalk stretched maybe 10 feet before vanishing into thick, roiling steam. I knew this loop by heart. There should have been a straight shot back to the main trail. But what I saw ahead was nothing but shifting gray, the kind of mist you could get lost in 2 steps deep. A soft hiss rose from behind me. I turned back. The figures were gone. The pool where they'd stood was now violently bubbling, the surface breaking in frantic bursts. The sound was louder than before, like water at a rolling boil, and then I realized it wasn't just sound, it was voices. Not clear ones, not words I could understand, but the tone was urgent, rising and falling like a chant. My stomach knotted, and I backed toward the steam-choked section of the boardwalk, flashlight raised. I don't remember the exact moment I broke into a run. 1 second I was walking fast, heart pounding. The next I was practically sprinting, the wooden planks rattling under my boots. The mist swallowed everything, and I had to trust my memory of the turns and railings to keep from stumbling into the pools. When I finally burst out into open air, I was gasping. The main trail was right there, empty and quiet. I turned to look behind me. The steam was thinner now. The pools sat still, just as they should, reflecting the fading light of day. No figures, no footprints, no sound. Back at the ranger station, I checked the patrol log. No one else had been assigned to that sector. No reported hikers, no missing persons. But later that night, when I hung my jacket in the locker, I noticed something on the sleeve. Faint, white-gray residue, like fine ash. I brushed it off with my fingers and swore it felt warm. If you ever visit Yellowstone and see shapes in the steam near the hot springs, don't go closer. Some shadows aren't cast by anything living, and some steam doesn't just rise from the earth, it rises from what the earth has taken. Subscribe, like, stay safe, or ignore it and see what follows you home. My name's Nathan Blackfox, and I've worked these lands long enough to know when something in the wilderness is wrong. I've been a ranger in Yellowstone for over 10 years, but I was raised on Cherokee ground, taught by my father and grandfather how to read the land like a book written in shadows and wind. I know how to track a deer without leaving a sound, how to tell the hour by the position of a shadow, and how to listen for things that don't want to be heard. And I've learned sometimes the things you hear are older than the trees themselves. It was early September, one of those deceptively perfect evenings when the air holds just enough bite to let you know summer's gone, but not enough to chase you into a jacket. The tourists had thinned out, leaving the park breathing in its natural rhythm, again quiet, steady, timeless. I'd been assigned a solo week-long patrol along the northern boundary, covering a stretch of backcountry that hardly anyone visits once the season turns. That day had been uneventful, clear skies, crisp air, the sound of wind moving through pine like running water. I'd walked almost 12 miles, checking old game trails and confirming that the few remaining hikers were sticking to marked paths. I set camp in a glade near a shallow creek, the kind of place where the ground is soft under the bedroll and the stars have room to breathe overhead. I chose it for its vantage open enough to see something coming, close enough to running water to hear trouble long before it arrived. The game trail cut just beyond the tree line, a faint, worn path through the grass, and the last gold light of sunset had painted it in fire before it slipped away. By the time the sun was gone, The forest was sinking into that deep, heavy stillness I've come to respect. It's a silence that feels alive, like the land is holding its breath. I lit my lantern low and kept it near the center of the tent, its glow a small circle of comfort against the vast dark outside. I was writing in my field log, making notes on elk tracks I'd seen earlier, when I first heard its slow, heavy crunches in the underbrush. Not the light scatter of a fox, not the nervous pacing of a raccoon. These were deliberate, measured. The steps came in twos, then a pause, then twos again. A predator's cadence, but too heavy for a wolf or cougar. I set my pencil down, letting my ears do the work. My grandfather always told me, "Don't look first, listen. Your ears will tell you the truth before your eyes can lie to you." The steps drew closer, and then I heard the breathing. Deep, powerful, controlled, the kind of breath that fills lungs the size of barrels. I could picture it without seeing it, a massive chest expanding, hot steam curling into the cool air. I told myself it was just an elk. We had plenty in the area. But something about the way it moved set my teeth on edge. No grazing pauses, no snorts, no head tosses, just slow, deliberate approach. I stayed still, my hand resting near my flashlight but not switching it on. My tent flap was zipped halfway, the upper part left open for air. Through that gap, I saw movement. At first, it was only the subtle shifting of shadow against deeper shadow. Then, it stepped forward. The lantern's glow caught it, an elk, but larger than any I'd ever seen in my life. Its antlers weren't just wide, they were wrong. They twisted unnaturally, curling in on themselves in deliberate spirals, like something had shaped them with intent. Its fur was a dark, almost oily brown that drank in the lantern light instead of reflecting it. And its eyes glowed. Not with the quick, fleeting glint you get when light catches an animal's gaze, but with a steady, ember-red burn. It was looking right at me, and I couldn't look away. I don't know how long we stayed like that, me sitting frozen inside my tent, it standing utterly still outside. My chest felt heavy, like something was pressing down on it. My breathing slowed without me willing it to, each inhale deep, each exhale soft. It was like my body was being tuned to match its rhythm. The air around it shimmered faintly, as though heat were rising from its body in waves. That's when I noticed its breath, not normal breath. With each exhale, a thick steam poured from its nostrils, heavier than any mist, curling low and refusing to dissipate. It drifted toward the tent, like smoke from a slow-burning fire, and inside that steam, faces began to form. They were faint at first, just soft impressions in the haze, but then they sharpened pale, stretched faces with hollow eyes and open mouths, silent, screaming without sound. I felt my pulse in my throat. My first instinct was to move, to grab the flashlight, to scare it off, but something deep inside told me that light wasn't going to scare this thing. It stepped forward once, its hooves making no sound at all. The lantern flickered. My vision narrowed until all I could see were those eyes. It lowered its head slightly, as if in greeting or warning. Then it exhaled again, and that heavy steam poured directly into the tent. The temperature dropped instantly. The warmth of my breath turned to clouds. My fingers went stiff before I could curl them, and the shapes in the steam began to move around me. Their silent mouths closer now, their blurred features twisting as they leaned in. One of them touched my cheek. It whispered my name. That broke whatever spell had been holding me. My hand shot to my pack, fingers clumsy but desperate. I found the cedar bundle, my grandmother's gift, and struck a match. The cedar caught quickly, the sharp, clean smoke curling upward in a thin gray ribbon. The elk stopped moving. It didn't flinch, didn't turn, but the red in its eyes dimmed just slightly. The steam slowed. It took a single step back, then another. Its gaze never left mine. When it turned, it didn't walk away like an animal. It drifted its steps too smooth, too silent. Within seconds, it was gone. The steam faded, the shapes dissolved, and the forest sounds came rushing back, the creek gurgling, a distant owl, the soft rustle of leaves. I sat there until dawn, cedar smoke heavy in the air, my body stiff and aching from staying frozen in one position. When I finally stepped outside, I expected to see deep hoof prints in the soft earth, but the grass was untouched, no prints, no sign of its passing, except for one thing. Just outside the tent flap, where it had stood, the ground was warm. If you ever camp in Yellowstone and wake to the sound of slow, deliberate breathing outside your tent, don't look. And whatever you do, don't meet its eyes, because if it watches you long enough, you won't want to look away. My name is Elias Two Rivers. I was born with water in my blood. My mother used to say I was swimming before I could walk rivers, creeks, even the cold spring-fed pools that made other kids squeal and dart out. I learned to fish with a willow rod and to read the ripples for where the trout were hiding. I could tell you which stream in my home county would flood first in spring and which would dry to a trickle by August. When you grow up like that, water stops being just water. It's a voice, a mood, a thing that remembers. It has rules older than people, and when those rules change, you feel it in your gut before you ever see it with your eyes. That's what happened along the Lewis River, 3 days into a solo patrol in Yellowstone's southern sector. It had been a warm day for early fall. Clouds slid lazily over the mountains, the sun ducking in and out, painting the valleys in light and shadow. I'd spent most of the afternoon hiking down a ridge toward the water, my pack heavy with extra gear and my boots picking up the smell of pine resin where the sun had warmed the needles. The plan was simple. Check the far end of the trail, note any new fire rings or trash, then follow the river upstream to a backcountry station I could bed down in for the night. I reached the Lewis River just before dusk. The light was thin, amber fading to a deep bruised blue. The river's song was steady, confident, just the way I liked it. I dropped my pack on the gravel bank and crouched low, letting my fingers trail in the current. It was colder than it should have been for that stretch in September. Not alarming, but notable. I logged it in my head. I ate a quick meal by the bank jerky and trail mix, and let the water keep me company. I've always liked that moment before dark, when the river seems to hold its breath just a little, as if it's deciding how it will sound through the night. That's when I noticed it. At first, I thought I'd just lost track of the flow. Maybe I'd gotten turned around on the bank. But no, the current was running backward, not in little eddies or confused pockets like you sometimes get near a bend. The whole river, the entire breadth of it, was sliding upstream, smooth and deliberate, as though the mountain had decided to drink its own runoff back in. I stood so quickly I almost tipped over the stove. My boots sank into the damp gravel, and I walked to the edge where the water licked at my toes. I scanned the bank for signs of a landslide upstream, a sudden dam break, anything that might have caused this. But the forest was silent, too silent. The wind had dropped out. No birds, no frogs. Even the soft grind of the current over stone had changed. It was deeper now, like a slow inhale instead of a rush. I waded in without thinking, the cold clamping around my calves and numbing me up to the knees. My jeans grew heavy and stiff in seconds, but I didn't care. I needed to understand what I was seeing. The fish weren't moving right either. A half-dozen small cutthroats hung in the current, perfectly still, not fighting it, not riding it, just suspended. Their gills moved, but too slowly, as if the water itself had forgotten how to carry air. I turned upstream and saw something that almost made me call out not for help, but in disbelief. The surface of the river was flattening. The ripples, the little standing waves, the feathered seams between deep and shallow water gone. The whole thing was smoothing over like poured glass, and then it started to climb. It's hard to explain what water climbing looks like if you haven't seen it. It didn't leap or surge like in a flood. It just rose against gravity, stretching forward and upward, sliding along a shape I couldn't see. Upstream, the dark pines reflected in it, but their images wavered, as though the water was bending more than light. I backed toward the bank, slow at first, then faster when I realized the fish weren't the only things in the current. Shapes. They weren't solid, not quite, but they had form. Human-sized, human-shaped. They drifted in the water, faces indistinct, hands trailing behind them like drowned things rising in reverse. One passed close enough that I could see through its head, but not entirely, like looking through thick glass that had shadows sealed inside. It turned toward me without moving its body, and the impression of a mouth formed. The water around me vibrated. I heard my name, not with my ears. The sound came from inside my chest, as if the river had taken the air I'd just breathed in and shaped it into speech before I could let it go. I stumbled back onto the gravel, my boots sucking at the mud. I grabbed my pack, but something instinct, maybe memory, made me pull out the little pouch of tobacco I carry. My grandfather told me once, if the water talks to you when it shouldn't, you give it something it can keep without keeping you. I pinched some tobacco and scattered it into the current. The shapes in the water paused. The surface rippled again, just for a moment, as though something had broken its concentration. Then the water surged forward, not upstream this time, but toward me. I ran, not far, just up the bank to a rise where I could still see the river but be out of reach. I stood there, my breath tearing at my throat, watching as the current slowed, reversed again, and finally resumed its normal course. The fish darted downstream. The wind came back in a hesitant gust. Somewhere, far off, a raven called, but the shapes were gone. I stayed on that rise until full dark, my lantern the only light for miles. When I finally made myself move, I didn't follow the river to the backcountry station. I cut upslope, bushwhacking through thick pine, putting as much elevation between me and that stretch of water as I could before pitching my tent. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the pull of the current, not on my body, but on my thoughts, like the river had hooked into the part of me that still believed it could call me back. I've been back to the Lewis River since. I've fished it, crossed it, watched it glint under summer sun. But I've never gone to that bend again, and if you ever see a river run backward, don't wade in. Don't touch the water, because if it learns your name, it might decide to keep it. Yellowstone isn't like other parks. You can work here for decades and still not feel like you belong. The land doesn't welcome you, it tolerates you, like an old predator, letting you pass through its territory so long as you don't make a wrong move. I've been a park ranger for over 20 years, most of it in the Great Smokies, some in Glacier, but nothing prepared me for Yellowstone. You feel it the second you step onto its soil, heat rising from somewhere deep underfoot, as if the ground has a pulse. And at night, when the tourists are gone, and the only light is the moon and your headlamp, it's worse. That's when you realize the earth here is thin in places, and what's underneath isn't just molten rock. It was mid-September, right at that point where summer hasn't quite given up but autumn is sharpening its knives. The days were warm, but the nights dropped quick 40 degrees or less once the sun went down. The sky had been clear all afternoon, the kind of pale blue you get in high country, but by the time I started my patrol, thin clouds had rolled in. Not storm clouds, just enough to smother the moonlight and make the shadows heavier. I'd drawn lower geyser basin duty that night. Most rangers avoid it after dark if they can, not because it's dangerous in the usual ways, but because it's too alive. The air there never stops moving. Steam hisses from vents, pools bubble without warning, and the ground itself cracks and shifts under the weight of the earth's breathing. Still, I don't spook easy. My people, the Cherokee, were walking land like this long before maps put names on it. My grandmother always said the land talks to you if you know how to listen. I grew up believing that. But Yellowstone, it talks in ways you don't always want to hear. The basin was empty when I got there. No tourists, no hikers, just the damp smell of minerals and that constant hiss in the background. I moved slow along the boardwalk, checking the safety rails, making sure the posted warnings hadn't been torn down or tagged. Every so often, I'd sweep my flashlight out over the vents and pools, the beam catching on clouds of steam that twisted like they had weight. About halfway through my circuit, I stopped at one of the smaller steam vents, a squat opening in the earth surrounded by white, crusted mineral deposits. It had been letting off more pressure lately, so I squatted down, took out my notebook, and jotted a few lines about the increased output. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the vent shifting, changing tone. Steam does that. It hisses, then rattles, then spits in ways that can almost sound like speech if you're tired enough. But this wasn't random. This was my name. Not loud, more like someone had leaned in close and murmured it right against my ear. I froze, pencil hovering over the paper. The vent kept hissing, but now there were threads of something else in the sound syllables I almost recognized, drawn out and stretched thin. I thought maybe the wind had carried a voice from somewhere else in the basin, but the air was dead still. The sound was coming from the steam. Samuel. This time it was clearer. Too clear. I stood slowly, scanning the basin. My flashlight beam cut through the mist in pale columns, but the further it reached, the more the light just dissolved. There was no one, no movement but the steam. My boots creaked against the boardwalk as I turned in a slow circle, every sense sharpened, waiting for something to step into view. That's when the faces began to form. At first, it was just shadows in the steam tricks of light, but the longer I stared, the more they took shape. Cheekbones, brows, mouths moving in slow, deliberate patterns. I blinked hard, but when my eyes cleared, they were still there. Some were strangers, some weren't. I saw my father's face. He'd been gone for 12 years, my grandfather too, then my sister gone since she was 18. The shock hit me so hard my knees almost buckled. They didn't smile, they didn't blink, they just stared through the mist, their lips moving without sound. Then, faint as a breath, came the whisper, "Come closer." The air around me had changed. It was heavier, wetter. My breath fogged in front of me even though the steam should have kept it warm. My grandmother's warnings rose in my mind like a shout. If the dead speak with your voice, you turn your back and you run. But I didn't run. I took a step toward the vent. The faces shifted, their mouths curling wider, like they were pleased. From behind me, another voice, this one sharper, urgent. My name again, but in a tone I recognized not family, not anyone I knew from this life. Something older. I spun, my flashlight beam catching on another vent 10 yards away. More faces. These were wrong, stretched, their eyes too deep, their mouths hanging open like they were inhaling instead of speaking. Steam curled through them as if the vent was breathing them into shape. The whisper came again, overlapping now, voices weaving together into a low, drawn-out hum that I could feel in my bones. My skin crawled, my legs felt heavy. I realized too late that the ground under my boots was warm, not just warm hot enough that I could feel it through the soles. I glanced down and saw hairline cracks spiderwebbing out from where I stood, thin tendrils of steam escaping. Something moved in the mist between the vents. Tall, pale, almost human, but its arms were too long, its fingers tapering to sharp points. It slid forward without sound, half visible, its edges blurring into the steam until it stepped just close enough for me to see the sockets where eyes should be. I backed toward the boardwalk. The thing moved with me. Another shape joined it, then another, until the steam was full of them, all turning their empty faces toward me. The whispers became a chant. Faster now, each word layered over the next until I couldn't tell where one ended and the next began. My chest felt tight, my vision narrowing to a tunnel of pale, shifting light. I hit the boardwalk with my heel and stepped up. The change was instant. The heat eased, the chant thinned, and the shapes in the steam faltered like smoke in the wind. Their faces dissolved, their mouths still moving as if they were screaming without sound. I didn't move for a long time, just stood there, breathing hard, watching the mist roll harmlessly where it had moments before it tried to pull me in. When I finally turned to leave, I didn't look back. I finished my patrol, but I stayed well clear of the vents. Later, back at the station, I checked the geothermal logs for the basin. There'd been no unusual activity that night, no shifts in temperature, no surges in steam output, nothing that explained what I'd seen. But I know this: if the steam in Yellowstone ever starts calling your name, it's not the earth talking. And if you step off the boardwalk, you might not find your way back. There's a saying among backcountry rangers: if you spend enough years in the wild, you start to notice when something's missing. A sound, a landmark, even a smell that's not quite right. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the opposite happens. Something appears that shouldn't be there. I've been in Yellowstone going on 12 years now. I've worked every sector: front country, back country, fire lines, winter patrols, but my favorite has always been the high overlooks. You can see the world laid out in layers from up there, ridges stacked on ridges, valleys folded in shadow, snowcaps far enough away they look like clouds pinned to the horizon. And until that day, I could have told you every feature in sight by name. It was late August, right after a storm had rolled through. The air was sharp, the sky a brittle blue that only happens after rain clears the dust. My assignment was simple: hike up to Eagle's Spine Overlook, check the condition of the railing and the storm damage along the trail. It's a 4-hour round trip if you take your time, less if you don't stop to breathe in the view. But I always stop. The last stretch to the overlook runs along a narrow path cut into the side of a slope. On one side, pine forest drops away into nothing but shadow. On the other, the wall of the ridge rises up sheer and unforgiving. You feel exposed up there, like the wind could just peel you off the trail and drop you in the valley. When I reached the overlook, the world was open in every direction. To the west, the Gallatin Range. To the north, the Absarokas, the Yellowstone River cutting through it all like a vein of silver. I pulled out my binoculars, scanning the usual landmarks: Eagle's Bluff, Twin Peaks, the scar of last year's wildfire, and then my hands froze. There was a ridge I'd never seen before. It sat beyond a line of familiar peaks, jagged, and dark, its tree line so dense it looked almost black. It wasn't small, either easily several miles long, rising in a crooked spine against the sky. And yet, it didn't belong there. I'd stood on this overlook dozens of times in every season, every weather. I knew every shadow and slope in sight. That ridge had never existed. At first I thought maybe it was a trick of light storm shadows pooling into the shape of something solid. But the longer I stared, the more details emerged. Trees bending in the wind, rock faces catching the sun, and something else, tiny glints, like light reflecting off water or glass. I took out my map. Nothing. No name, no mark, no contour lines to suggest it had ever been surveyed. That's when the wind picked up. It came from the direction of the ridge, carrying a scent I didn't recognize. Not pine, not wet earth, not the usual geothermal tang of Yellowstone. This was metallic, sharp like the smell when lightning strikes too close. My scalp prickled. I should have left it at that, made a note, radioed it in, gone back to the station. But curiosity's a stubborn thing, and I've never been good at ignoring it. I decided I'd hike toward it, at least far enough to get a better look. The first 2 miles were easy game trails and old ranger paths I'd walked 100 times. But somewhere in the 3rd mile, the forest began to change. The trees grew closer together. Their trunks twisted like something had grabbed them and tried to wring them out. The ground dipped in odd, shallow hollows, each filled with dead leaves that looked untouched by wind. No birds, no squirrels, just the sound of my own boots and the low rush of distant wind. By the 5th mile, my compass needle started to drift. At first I thought it was my movement throwing it off, but then it spun a slow, lazy circle even while I stood still. My GPS didn't help. The screen blinked, searching for signal over and over, and yet, every time I looked up, the ridge was still there, just as far away as when I'd started. That's when I realized it was moving. Not shifting like a mirage, moving like the entire formation was sliding sideways across the horizon. It didn't move fast, but it moved with intent, adjusting its position as I changed mine, like it was keeping the same distance between us. I told myself I'd go 1 more mile, then turn back. But before I'd even gone a quarter of that, I stepped into a clearing that hadn't been there seconds before. The grass was short and dry, flattened in concentric circles like something had pressed it down from above. In the center was a rock, not unusual for the area, except this one was carved with lines I'd never seen, jagged, intersecting patterns that made my eyes ache if I stared too long. The wind surged again, and the air around me went cold. Not high-altitude, cool, bone-deep cold, like standing in front of an open freezer. And underneath the cold, I heard it. A sound rolling across the forest from the direction of the ridge. Low, rhythmic, almost like chanting. I turned to leave, and the ridge was closer. No more than a mile away now, its tree line so sharp I could see individual branches swaying. The glints I'd noticed earlier weren't water, they were windows, dozens of them, tucked between the trees, each catching the weak afternoon light. I started moving fast, back the way I'd come, but the forest didn't match my memory. Trails doubled back on themselves. Landmarks shifted. The sun seemed to hang in the same place, neither rising nor setting. When I finally broke free of the trees, I was standing back at the overlook. My watch said I'd been gone 40 minutes. My body said it had been hours. I lifted my binoculars again. The ridge was gone. No trace, no shadow, just the familiar skyline I'd always known. Back at the station, I pulled every old survey map I could find. Nothing. No mention of any ridge in that direction. No logging history. No fire scars that matched. I asked 2 other rangers who'd worked the park longer than me. Neither had seen it, neither wanted to. That night, lying in my cabin, I dreamed of the ridge. I was standing at its base, looking up at windows set into the earth itself, each one lit from within. Shadows moved past them, tall, slow, deliberate shapes. And when I woke, I could still hear the wind carrying that metallic scent. If you ever find yourself in Yellowstone and see a ridge that doesn't belong, don't go toward it, because if it decides to come toward you, there's nowhere in the park you can hide. Yellowstone teaches you to respect what lies under your feet. Most people think of it as a park-wide valleys, roaming elk, postcard geysers. But the land under all that beauty is thin, fragile, and restless. One misstep and you can break through into a scalding grave. I've seen it happen. Once was enough to understand this place isn't just dangerous, it's alive in ways we can't measure. I've been a park ranger here for 22 years. The jobs brought me blizzards that felt like they'd never end, grisly charges that still wake me in the middle of the night, and the quiet kind of tragedy when a family leaves with one less than they came with. But in all that time, the strangest things I've seen have always happened in the steam. That night was no different. It was late October, tourist season had all but dried up. The day had been brisk, the kind that makes you think winter is tapping at the door. By the time night settled in, a low fog had rolled into the lower geyser basin. I was walking the boardwalk alone, my headlamp cutting narrow beams into the mist. The air smelled thick of sulfur, the vents hissing in their usual rhythm, but the quiet was deeper than it should have been. I'd done this route 100 times. It's a strange kind of peaceful, like walking through the breath of the earth itself. But about a mile in, the fog changed. It didn't just hang there anymore. It moved in curls and spirals, as if something invisible was pacing under it. My radio gave a sharp burst of static before cutting out entirely. That's when I saw it. A warm, amber light glowing faintly in the mist ahead. It flickered like fire, not the harsh white glare of a flashlight. My first thought was that some late hiker had gotten lost and brought a lantern for nostalgia's sake. But it didn't make sense. Backcountry camping was banned here, and no one had signed out for a night hike. I cupped my hands around my mouth and called out, "Park ranger, you okay out there?" No answer. The light swayed gently, like someone shifting their weight. Then it drifted further away. Something in me said to let it go. But the job doesn't work like that. You see someone or something, you check it out. I followed. It kept its distance, maybe 30 feet ahead. I'd take 5 steps forward, and it would glide 5 steps farther. The fog seemed thicker between us, the lantern just barely visible through the folds of steam. I tried again. "Stay where you are. I'll come to you." Nothing. My boots left the solid rattle of the boardwalk without me realizing it. I was on soft ground now, damp enough that each step sank with a muted squish. I knew better than to walk this terrain blind. The ground here can be nothing more than a paper-thin crust above boiling water, but the lantern kept pulling me forward, and the part of me that should have been screaming to stop felt strangely muted. Through the haze, the shape holding the lantern began to sharpen. Broad shoulders, head tilted slightly forward. A man. I slowed. Something about the way he carried himself was familiar. The forward lean, the careful, deliberate pace, like someone used to moving heavy loads on uneven ground. Then it hit me. Marcus Red Elk. We'd trained together in our early days. 2 rookies thinking we'd spend our careers giving directions to tourists and keeping an eye out for wolves. Marcus was assigned to a sector on the far side of the park, rougher country, more bear incidents. 5 winters ago, during a blizzard, he went through thin ice over a thermal runoff channel. The rescue team recovered part of his parka days later. His body was never found. I'd carried his empty pack out myself, but here he was. The light in his brass lantern burned steady, warping slightly in the old glass. His skin was pale in a way no living man's skin should be, his eyes deep pools of shadow. Marcus? My voice cracked, the name foreign in my mouth after so long. His lips curved into a faint smile. You found me. The words carried easily through the steam, no louder than a whisper, yet I heard them as if he were standing beside me. You shouldn't be here, I said. He tilted his head the other way, like I'd spoken in another language. Neither should you. I gripped the cedar bundle on my belt. My grandmother always said, if something in the world wears the face of someone you've buried, you don't meet it empty-handed. The cedar smell cut sharp through the sulfur, grounding me. Marcus's eyes flicked to it. His smile thinned. There's a place, he said, beyond the springs. You've never seen it. I can show you. The ground beneath me pulsed just once, but enough to make my knees unlock. The earth here breathes, sometimes, but this was different. This was like it was reacting to what he'd said. I shook my head. Not tonight. He took a step closer, the fog folding around him. Don't make me come get you. The steam surged, blinding me for a heartbeat. When it cleared, he was 10 feet away. The lantern hung low, casting its glow over the ground between us, and I saw it just past his boots. The crust was split, steam pouring from the crack. Beneath it, the water was black, boiling so violently the bubbles broke without sound. One step closer and I'd be in it. I backed up, my heel striking wood. The boardwalk. Somehow, I'd found my way back to it. Marcus didn't follow. The flame in his lantern leaned toward me, like it was being drawn by breath. You'll see it eventually, he murmured, and when you do, you'll come. Then the light vanished, swallowed by the steam. The vents around me hissed louder than before, as if mocking me. My radio crackled to life with the dispatcher's voice asking for my position. I checked my watch. 20 minutes had passed. It felt like hours. Back at the station, my boots left dark, wet prints on the floor, but when I bent to untie them, the moisture on my laces was warm, almost hot, and beneath the faint sulfur scent, there was something else. Lantern oil. I haven't seen the light since, but some nights, when the steam drifts in thick from the basin and the world feels too quiet, I catch that smell, and I know he's still out there, waiting. If you ever see a lantern moving through Yellowstone steam after dark, don't follow it. It's not there to guide you. It's there to make sure you never leave. My name's Benjamin Wildsky, and there are places in Yellowstone where the land feels unfinished. Places where it's like the world's surface has worn thin and something else is pressing against it, testing for weak spots. Most folks will never see those places. Some of them can't even be found twice. Trails vanish, valleys change shape, and the woods close in like they were never open to begin with. But I found one I wish I hadn't. It started as a routine day in late July, the kind of warm, pine-scented morning that makes you forget how dangerous these mountains can be. I was sent to investigate a remote section of the park's northern boundary after a wildlife tracker reported hearing metal scraping stone out there. No clear location, just somewhere past the glacial ridges. No marked trails, no tourists, just me, my pack, my rifle, and the sound of my boots crunching dry ground. The air was heavy with the smell of resin and sun-baked earth. Somewhere high above, a hawk screamed. My route took me over uneven rock shelves, through patches of deadfall where beetle-killed pines lay in heaps. Sweat soaked my collar by mid-morning, and the sun filtered in shafts through the trees like gold dust. It was summer in every possible sense, until it wasn't. I'd just come through a narrow pinch between two boulders when the temperature dropped hard so fast my breath caught. It wasn't gradual. One step I was in July, the next I could see my breath plume in front of me. The warmth vanished. The forest floor, moments ago covered in needles and dry duff, was now white. A thick layer of fresh snow stretched before me, glinting in the sunlight. It spread in a perfect circle, 30 yards across, rimmed by a sharp edge where the snow met bare ground, and it wasn't melting, not even under the direct glare of the summer sun. My boots crunched on the crust as I stepped forward, and every sound seemed muffled, like the snow swallowed it whole. The summer smells were gone too, replaced by the sterile, metallic bite of deep winter. At first, I thought maybe I'd stumbled into some bizarre microclimate, something geothermal or freakishly cold air pooling in a depression. But then I saw the prints. They were arranged in a flawless ring in the center of the clearing. Not paw prints, claw prints. Each one was 2 feet long. The toes spread wide, tipped with gouges so deep they bit into the ice beneath the snow. They were evenly spaced, too precise for an animal wandering or hunting. Whatever made them had walked the circle perfectly. Again and again, I crouched to study one, my knees sinking into the snow. The edges of the track were razor sharp, no melt, no drift. Fresh, very fresh. My gloved fingers brushed the ice, and a jolt of cold shot through my hand so fast it ached. That's when I noticed the tunnel. It sat on the far edge of the circle, tucked beneath a massive root system from an ancient pine. The roots curled and twisted like the bones of a giant hand, and between them yawned a dark opening. It was big enough for me to crawl through if I was stupid enough to try. A slow, steady draft blew from the tunnel, colder than the snow, carrying a scent I couldn't place. Not rot, not sulfur, something dry, like the inside of a cave that's been sealed for centuries. And if I held my breath, I swore I could hear movement inside, something shifting far down the black throat of that hole. I stood, brushing frost from my gloves. Every instinct I had screamed to back away, but there was something about the place, something that made my skin prickle, like I'd been here before in a dream. I started circling the clearing, careful to keep to the bare ground at the edge. My boots crackled over frost-killed grass, and I kept my eyes on the tracks in the snow. That's when I realized they were following me. At first, I thought I was just seeing the same ring of tracks from different angles. But no. The claw marks were multiplying in my peripheral vision, keeping perfect pace with me. I stopped, so did they. The clearing went dead silent. Not a single sound from the forest. Even the wind seemed to have stopped moving. I swallowed, my throat tight, and reached for my radio. "Station, this is Wildski. Do you copy?" The static hissed like a living thing. Then, faintly, "Benjamin, Wildski." The voice was broken, stretched, like it was coming through water. "This is Wildski." "Who is this?" Static again. Then, "Don't step in the circle." Before I could respond, the radio went dead. My eyes dropped to my boots. The toe of my right foot was less than an inch from the nearest claw print. I backed up fast, my breath loud in my ears. The moment my heels hit bare dirt, it was like breaking the surface after being underwater. Warmth flooded back into my bones. The scent of pine rushed into my lungs. I turned to leave, and froze. The snow in the center of the circle was moving, not melting, rising. Slowly, like something beneath it was pushing upward. The crust cracked with a sound like ice splitting on a frozen lake. A thin seam of black vapor curled into the air, coiling toward me in deliberate, snaking motions. I stumbled back another step. My hand found the cedar bundle in my pocket and I held it tight, muttering the words my grandmother taught me for protection. The vapor hesitated, then it sank back into the crack, and the snow went still. I didn't wait to see if it would move again. The hike back felt wrong, like the forest had rearranged itself while I was in the clearing. Familiar ridges seemed steeper. Gullies ran in directions they shouldn't. At one point, I swore I saw my own footprints coming toward me from the opposite direction. When I finally broke out onto the ridge and looked back, the clearing was gone. Just grass and pines and July sunlight. But that night, I dreamed I was standing in it again. This time, I was inside the ring of tracks. The tunnel breathed behind me, and I could hear claws scratching closer with each heartbeat. When I woke, there was frost on my pillow. If you ever find snow in Yellowstone when there shouldn't be snow, don't go near it. Don't look at the tracks. And if you hear something moving under the surface, run. Some winters never end. My name's Michael Redfern, and I've walked more miles of Yellowstone than most people could imagine. I've crossed steaming geyser basins before sunrise, hiked the ridgelines where the wind cuts so sharp it can peel the warmth right out of you, and patrolled the caldera floor in the dead of winter when the snow is so deep it swallows the world whole. I know the sound of this place the way elk bugles echo in Hayden Valley, the low growl of a distant geyser, the sigh of steam venting into cold air. But there are nights when Yellowstone doesn't sound like itself, nights when the fog moves in thicker than it should, and the familiar trails start to feel wrong. This happened late last November, after a week of unseasonably warm days that had tricked the bison into wallowing near the road again. That evening, the temperature dropped hard and fast. A low blanket of thermal fog rolled out from the geyser basin, creeping across the valleys and settling like milk in the lowlands. My radio crackled with a request to check one of the smaller overlooks west of the Firehole River, one of those pullouts tourists rarely notice in summer, but that offers a clear view over the treetops when the air's clear. I knew the place well, but that night, the visibility was so bad that my flashlight beam vanished after a few yards. The usual background chorus of Yellowstone, water burbling under ice, the distant hiss of steam was strangely muted, as if the fog had swallowed the sound. I pulled my collar tighter and started up the short trail from the service road. The ground was still warm from the geothermal heat below, a thin layer of frost crunching under my boots despite the heat bleeding through the soil. Each step sank with a muted sound, damp gravel mixed with pumice. The fog drifted in long, lazy tendrils across the path, curling upward as if stirred by something moving ahead of me. When I reached the overlook, I stopped dead. Through the pale wall of fog, I could just make out the dark silhouette of someone standing at the edge of the cliff. A woman. She stood perfectly still, her outline faint but clear enough to see the way her hair, or what I thought was hair, hung down in uneven strands. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, her arms hanging limp at her sides. She was far too close to the edge, maybe inches away from where the drop-off began. I cleared my throat, my voice sounding small in the damp air. "Ma'am, you need to step back from the edge. It's not safe up there." No reaction. The fog shifted, and for just a moment, I thought I saw her head turn slightly, like she was listening. I took a cautious step forward, keeping my boots quiet against the wet gravel. "Park Ranger," I called again, a little louder. "Are you lost? Injured?" She didn't move. The wind picked up slightly, just enough to push a stream of fog between us, and when it thinned again, I realized she wasn't quite facing the valley anymore. She was turning toward me, slowly. Her movement was deliberate, almost mechanical. My pulse climbed. Every instinct I'd learned from years out here told me to back away, but something in the air held me rooted in place. When her face came into view, the heat from the ground seemed to drain right out of me. It wasn't right. Her features were there, but they didn't fit together like they should. Her eyes were too far apart, set deep in dark sockets that swallowed what little light the fog allowed. Her skin was pale in a way that didn't belong to the living waxy, with a faint sheen like damp clay. And her mouth stretched wider than it should when she finally smiled. The expression didn't match her eyes. The smile was too broad, too eager, and yet her gaze was flat and cold. "Michael," she said. The sound of my name in her voice made the hair on the back of my neck rise. She didn't say it like a stranger might after reading my name tag. She said it like someone who already knew me intimately. "I don't think we've met," I said carefully, my voice tight. Her head tilted sharply to one side, like she was trying to understand why I'd lie. The fog thickened between us, swirling in strange patterns. For a moment, her shape blurred into the mist, but then she stepped forward, closing the gap between us far too quickly. I backed up a pace. My boot slipped slightly on the damp gravel, and my hand went to the cedar bundle I keep on my belt. Her smile faded, and the coldness in her eyes deepened. "Come closer," she whispered. It wasn't an invitation, it was a command. I took another step back and raised the cedar in front of me. My grandmother always said the spirits here know the old ways, even if they pretend they don't. I muttered the prayer she'd taught me, keeping my eyes locked on hers. The fog swirled violently then, wrapping around her form like living fabric. She hissed, not a sound a person makes, but something deeper, older, like steam forcing its way through a crack in the earth. Then she was gone. The fog thinned just enough to reveal the overlook railing, empty. I moved forward cautiously, shining my flashlight across the wet stone, the drop-off vanishing into white nothingness below. No footprints, no sign anyone had stood there. When I turned to head back down the trail, the fog shifted again. Far down the path, through the pale curtain, I thought I saw her silhouette, standing in the same unnatural stillness this time, blocking the way back to my truck. I didn't approach. I cut into the trees instead, moving fast but silent, taking an unmarked route I'd scouted years ago. I didn't stop until I reached the service road, my breath loud in the still air. When I glanced back, the trail behind me was clear. I told myself she was gone. I wanted to believe that. But as I drove back to the ranger station, I could still see the pale reflection of her face in my side mirror, smiling that too wide smile as the fog swallowed the road behind me. If you're ever out here and the fog is so thick you can barely see 10 feet in front of you, and you notice a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, don't call out to her. Don't let her hear your name, because once she does, the fog will never stop following you. They call it Raven's Chasm on most maps, but that name's a lie. I've been a ranger at Yellowstone for over 2 decades, and I've never seen a raven within a mile of it. Even the crows won't roost near the rim. The place is narrow and deep, the kind of canyon where sunlight barely brushes the bottom even in midsummer. The air down there is cold, damp, and heavy, as if the earth itself is holding its breath. Most tourists never even find the place. You have to know where to look, and even then, you've got to want to go there. It's not along any of the regular trails. It doesn't have a scenic overlook. There's no plaque or fence, just a faint, narrow track that veers away from the main path and winds through dense lodgepole pine before dropping off into shadow. Rangers keep it unmarked on purpose. I was sent to check it one evening in late September after a pair of hikers reported strange noises coming from below. That's not unusual out here. thermal activity, rockfalls, even wind through narrow gaps can create unsettling sounds, but they insisted it wasn't any of that. They weren't animal noises, the woman said, her voice low. It sounded like screaming. Not just one voice, dozens. The man with her didn't say anything, but the way his jaw clenched told me enough. It had been a long day already, but I told them I'd hike in and take a look. I didn't want them going home thinking someone might be hurt out there. The trail to the chasm isn't long in terms of miles, but it's the kind of path that wears on you: steep switchbacks, loose rock, and overhanging branches that claw at your sleeves. As I walked, the air temperature dipped with each bend, and the sound of the wind faded until it was just my boots on the dirt and my own breathing. That night, the sky was bruised with the last light of sunset. A thin band of gold smeared along the horizon while the rest deepened into indigo. The pine trees grew denser as I descended, their silhouettes black against the dim sky. The smell of pitch and cold stone filled my lungs. I slowed as the trees thinned, the sound of my steps crunching over patches of old frost that shouldn't have been there this early in the season. By the time I reached the canyon rim, the last sunlight was gone. The chasm yawned beneath me, two sheer walls of volcanic rock plunging into blackness so complete it was like staring into water at night. The air rising from below was cold and wet, smelling faintly of iron, and that's when I heard it. It started as a thread of sound, so faint I thought it was the wind curling through the canyon. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized it wasn't wind at all. It was voices, dozens of them. They didn't cry for help. They screamed. Raw, unbroken screaming, the kind that tears a person's throat, the kind that goes beyond pain into something primal, the sound of a body trying to rid itself of terror it can't contain. I crouched at the rim, trying to track where it came from. The sound wasn't climbing straight up, it moved, drifting in slow arcs as if circling far below, bouncing off the stone in strange ways. Then something cold gripped my gut. The screams, they weren't layered like you'd expect from a group of people. They were timed, a rhythm, not chanting exactly, but close. It was like listening to a language I didn't know but could almost understand. I pulled my flashlight and aimed the beam down. It cut through the first 30 feet before vanishing into black. No bottom, no movement, just dark. My radio crackled, then hissed into static. The signal was strong when I'd started my hike. Now it wavered, cutting in and out like the air itself was blocking it. I took a cautious step along the rim, gravel skittering into the void. The screaming followed me, sliding along the rock walls in perfect sync with my movements. That's when I realized there was no echo. Sound in a canyon like this should ricochet for seconds, bouncing until it blurs into nothing. But here, the screams were sharp and clean, as if they weren't traveling at all, just appearing in the air next to me. A cold draft surged up from the depths, sharp enough to sting my cheeks. Beneath the wet mineral scent, I caught something else, something wrong, sweet, like rotting fruit left in a closed room. The screams rose suddenly, all the voices pulling together in a pitch that made my teeth ache. It wasn't just noise, it was aimed at me. My grip tightened on the flashlight until my knuckles hurt. I should have turned and walked away. Instead, I cupped my hands and called down, "This is Park Ranger Little Hawk. If you're injured or trapped, shout back." The canyon went silent, the wind stilled, and then, from deep below, one voice rose above the rest. "Jacob." My name, drawn out like a song, but wrong flat in tone. The syllables stretched until they barely sounded human. I stepped back from the rim, boots scraping over loose stone. The voices returned all at once, sharper, more urgent, as if trying to pull me closer. Then the single voice called again this time. It sounded like someone I knew. It was my cousin David. David, who died in a climbing accident 15 years ago. Help me, Jacob. The cold draft thickened, carrying that sweet, rotten smell in waves. The darkness below seemed to swell upward, shifting like it was alive. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, but I reached for the cedar bundle on my belt. I flicked my lighter and touched flame to the dried leaves until smoke curled up in white ribbons. I held the bundle over the edge. The screaming faltered, some of the voices twisting into high, animal-like shrieks. The smoke drifted down, vanishing into the black. For a moment, shapes formed in it, pale figures with limbs too long, bodies clinging to the canyon walls. Their faces were stretched, mouths open in silent agony. I stumbled backward, never taking my eyes off the rim. The screams didn't fade. They followed me, pacing my retreat along the trail, rising and falling like breath on the back of my neck. Only when I reached the tree line did they begin to die away. By the time I reached the trailhead, the air was warmer, the wind moving again. My radio clicked back to life. I didn't file a full report. Some parts of Yellowstone don't belong on paper. If you ever hear screaming from a canyon here, especially if it calls your name, don't lean over the edge, because something down there is waiting for you too. My name is David Running Bear, and I've been a park ranger in Yellowstone for 11 years. In that time, I've dealt with just about everything the park can throw at you. Grizzlies tearing apart trash bins, hikers who swear they know the trail, only to get lost 3 miles in, and the occasional tourist who thinks petting a bison will make for a great photo. I've seen plenty of birds, 2 majestic bald eagles circling above the Yellowstone River, osprey diving so fast they hit the water like spears, and hawks so large their shadows ripple across the grasslands below them. But there's one thing I can tell you with absolute certainty. No bird in this park should ever make the forest go silent. When it does, it means something else is watching. It was early October when this happened, the kind of morning where the air carries the first edge of winter. The sky was pale and cloudless, the cold so dry it seemed to make every sound sharper. I was assigned to a solo patrol of the Lamar Valley, a wide-open stretch of land where the mountains cradle you on all sides, where bison graze in the distance, and the wind moves the grass in slow waves. Clusters of cottonwoods broke up the view here and there, their leaves already turning to gold. I had my binoculars slung around my neck and my small leather field notebook open in one hand, jotting down bird activity. The migration season was well underway, and normally the valley would be alive with motion starlings flocking in clouds, ravens riding thermals, the chatter of chickadees darting from branch to branch. But that morning, nothing. No chirps, no wings. Even the wind seemed to have gone still, as though the entire valley was holding its breath. It didn't hit me all at once. At first, I just felt a strange stillness, the way you notice silence after you step inside from a busy street. But the longer I walked, the heavier it got. It wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. That's when I saw it. Far ahead, high up in the bare skeleton of a dead cottonwood, a massive, dark shape sat perfectly still. At a glance, it looked like some kind of huge bird, maybe an eagle, maybe a particularly big raven, but even from 100 yards away, something in my gut told me it wasn't right. The posture was wrong. Birds shift their weight, tilt their heads, flick their tails. This thing didn't so much as twitch. I slowed my pace and brought my binoculars up. Its eyes caught the light, and for a split second I thought it was just glare from the morning sun. But no, the glow wasn't white or golden like reflected light. It was deep, molten amber, pulsing faintly like embers inside a dying fire. The instant my eyes met its, a pressure settled in my chest, not fear exactly, more like a weight, as if the space between us had thickened. I lowered the binoculars. The pressure stayed. The thing didn't move, but I had the distinct sense it was watching every step I took. So, without really thinking, I stepped closer. 50 yards out, I noticed its breathing. It wasn't quick or shallow like a bird's should be. The chest, if you could call it that, rose and fell in long, deliberate cycles, like the slow inflation of a bellows. Then the wings opened. They didn't snap out like a raptor's. They unfolded, one joint at a time, in an unhurried, almost deliberate motion. The span was enormous, easily 12 feet from tip to tip. But that wasn't the part that made my stomach turn. The feathers weren't feathers. They were thin, elongated, too flexible, bending with the faint breeze like strips of cloth or wet leather. The sound it made when it opened its wings wasn't a call or a screech. It was a low, resonant groan, the kind you hear when an old tree shifts under strain. It didn't echo, it seemed to sink into my bones. Every instinct in me screamed to turn around, but some stubborn part of me stepped forward again. That was a mistake. It dropped from the branch without a single flap, gliding toward me as though gravity meant nothing. Its head stayed locked forward, eyes boring into mine the entire way. The air between us seemed to tighten, pressing at my skin, making it hard to breathe. I reached for the cedar bundle on my belt, fumbling for my lighter, but before I could spark it, the thing tilted in mid-air, veering away to land on another dead tree barely 10 yards off. It crouched there in silence, watching, testing. Its eyes dimmed slightly, like whatever it was had pulled back, waiting to see what I'd do next. My hands shook as I got the cedar lit. Smoke curled into the cold air, twisting toward the creature like it was drawn to it. And then, for the first time, it moved in a way that wasn't calculated. It recoiled. The wings didn't fold like a bird's. They wrapped inward around its body in unnatural arcs, curling in ways that suggested too many joints. The shape seemed to shrink into itself until it was no more than a hunched, dark knot against the branch. And then it was gone. Not flown away, not climbed down, just gone. The valley stayed silent as I stood there, the cedar smoke clinging to my gloves. The cottonwood branch it had perched on swayed gently, though the air was still. I walked back to my truck without rushing, but every step felt exposed. I could feel something watching, not from the trees, but from somewhere higher, somewhere above the thin blue sky. When the first sound returned, a single distant raven call, I almost jumped. The rest of the forest noises trickled back slowly, as if the land was unsure it was safe again. I didn't put the sighting in my logbook. I didn't tell the other rangers. Some things out here are better left unsaid, but I've carried twice the cedar ever since. If you ever find yourself in Yellowstone and see a bird so large it looks like it could blot out the sun, and if the forest goes silent around you, don't stare. And if it stares back, light something that burns, and don't stop until you can't see it anymore, because whatever that thing is, it's not here for the sky. My name is Isaac Clearbrook, and I've been a park ranger in Yellowstone for over 15 years, long enough to tell the difference between the normal weird and the kind that tilts the world under your boots. Long enough to know this land has places it doesn't want you to find, places that aren't on any official map, places no GPS can keep hold of. Most days I give those places a wide berth, but sometimes the park chooses you instead of the other way around. It was early November when I found the cabin. The sky had that flattened, pewter look that makes noon feel like evening. The last tatters of aspen gold had blown away the week before, and snow had come and gone in thin skins that shattered under a boot step and left the ground raw brown again. You could smell winter stalling just out of sight, cold metal, dry bark, a whiff of sulfur if the wind turned toward a basin. Dispatch had me following up on a message from a wildlife tracker. "We trust, quiet guy, spends more time looking down than up." He'd radioed that he'd crossed fresh grizzly sign in a block of forest where nobody has business being but animals. Deep toe marks in frozen duff, a churned stump the size of a wood stove, scat still steaming. I headed for the western edge of the park with a day pack, a thermos, and the old cedar bundle I keep tied to my belt for luck and the kind of things that aren't luck. The trail I took isn't a trail so much as an understanding. You set your compass, tuck into the lodge poles, keep your shoulders a hair's breadth off the bark, and move the way water moves, taking space where it's given, pressing where it's not. The light in there narrows to a thin, green-gray seam. Needles deaden your steps, and every sound you make climbs only halfway out of your throat before the trees take it. An hour in, the forest tightened, younger pines pushing up through the bones of old blowdowns, a few aspen snags where pileated woodpeckers had hammered the trunks into lace. I hadn't seen any grizzly sign yet, not even a heel print washed soft by a sunburst. I was just thinking about swinging north to find a game trail when I caught it faint, fragile as a memory, wood smoke. It wasn't the sharp nose of a new campfire or the throat sting of green wood. This was old, smoke-thin, papery, the way a room smells after a coal stove goes out and leaves its ghosts hanging in the curtains. In November, smoke where there shouldn't be smoke will get a ranger walking. Even a cold fire can mean squatting, trespassing, or worse, a dumb luck ember and a wind shift that makes a headline out of the whole forest. I adjusted my heading and let my feet choose the quietest path. A trickle of air brushed my cheek from the west, and the smoke came with it, a little stronger, like the woods wanted me to notice and couldn't help but tell me so. The lodge poles grew thicker. Their trunks stood as close as teeth, and I moved sideways sometimes, pack scraping, counting my breathing to keep it slow. The ground rose, then sank into a shallow swell, no map marks. I stepped through a fringe of young fir and into a clearing I did not know existed. It wasn't much, maybe 20 paces across, a hollow punched in the trees. The floor was tufted with winter-burned grasses and frost-blackened kinnikinnick. A ring of low stumps circled the space, all cut long before the park, their faces silver and furred with lichen. And in the middle of that, like something dropped from a different world and left to sink into ours, sat a small log cabin, 15 feet square, no higher than my shoulder. The logs had gone the color of old bones, their ends blunted, the chinking between them cracked and puckered like scars. The roof sagged under a mat of dead needles and wind-blown cones. No stovepipe, no window glass winking, no door. I didn't notice the last part until I walked 3 steps closer and my stomach told me to stop. Then I stood still and let my eyes do the work. No door, no windows, 4 walls, solid from corner to corner. Every side the same, split logs tongue, and grooved tight enough that you couldn't slip a coin edge in the seams. I made a slow circle. Nothing changed. 4 sides, no breaks. The corner notches were old school, hand-cut, the angles off by human degrees, not machine ones. Nothing in that clearing looked fresh. Even the roof's pitch was wrong, a few shy degrees flatter than it should be if someone meant to shed snow. If a human being had built this, they'd sealed themselves in and left no trace of a way out. It should have been a practical joke with bad carpentry, but the hair along my arms told me to keep my mouth shut. That's when I heard it quiet, like a fingernail along a page where a pressed flower once lived. Scratch, pause, Scratch, scratch. Something inside the log box. Not a mouse, not bird feet. The sound had weight, dry, slow, patient. I stood there long enough to watch my breath thread the cold and disappear. Then I spoke, calm and even, the way you do when you want to sound like you've got all the time in the world. "This is Park Ranger Clearbrook," I said. "If you're inside, knock 3 times. Silence. Then, like the cabin had been listening and grew tired of pretending otherwise, 3 knocks, so hard and close they knocked frost off a mid-wall log and dusted the clearing with glitter. My tongue went dry. I glanced around the clearing like there might be a door I'd somehow missed, a trick of light that changed wood into air. Nothing, just those 4 walls, the roof like a fallen hand. I stepped to my left. The scratching began again, matching my pace from inside. I stopped. It stopped. I walked the other way. It followed. When I backed away, slow, the scratching receded but stayed opposite me, like we were 2 magnets with a plank of wood between us, one moving, one pulled. I pressed my palm to a log because some part of me wanted proof that the world still worked the way I remembered. The wood was cold, not icy cold like old stone. I felt the vibration of a drag along the inner surface beneath my hand, nails or claws, the rhythm slow, the patience behind it almost human. I clicked my flashlight on without thinking and washed the beam across the seams, looking for a tell, a dark line that would betray a hidden door. The light made the grain jump, loops and eyes and the odd scar of a knot blown out years ago. Nothing more. No seam, no hinge, no answer to the question rising in my throat. The old people on my mother's side have a saying I carry in a jacket pocket. If the land points out a thing, you ask yourself why it wants you to see it. If you can't come up with an answer you like, you leave. But the job is the job, and wood smoke out here is a job. "Is anyone injured?" I called. "Are you stuck?" Silence. Then 3 quick knocks, as if someone laughed in wood. The air in the clearing felt wrong, like I was standing in a room where someone had scraped all the sound out and not washed the bowl after. My breath sounded too loud, and my heartbeat sounded like it belonged to somebody behind me. I reached for the cedar at my belt and pulled it free, the bundle small enough to hide in a palm. I struck the field lighter and coaxed the flame until the smoke started to pull a thin, sweet, bitter line that always smells like home and warnings. I held it chest high and offered it like you offer a handshake you hope won't be accepted. The scratching stopped. I didn't imagine that the cabin changed shape, but something changed. Not a sound, not a shift. The way a room changes when somebody walks in and doesn't speak. The logs felt tighter under my palm, and the air went a degree colder. The smoke crawled toward the cabin on a wind that wasn't there, and pressed itself along the seams like a cat looking for a crack to slip through. When it reached a knothole big as my thumb, it didn't curl away. It hung there, worrying the hole, then slow slid in. I've seen smoke behave rude, eddy where it shouldn't, lunge at a gust, gutter under a porch, even come out somewhere else. I have not seen smoke make up its mind. "All right," I said, mostly so my voice would remind me I still had one. "I'm going to back away now." From inside, not a scratch, not a knock, something like a breath, not in or out, the suggestion of lungs, the way a coal stove whispers when the door shuts. I took a step back, another. The cedar smoke ran a rope from my hand to the cabin for a few feet before the line broke and unspooled across the cold like a thin veil. When I reached the ring of old stumps, the scratching started again. Not the slow patience I'd first heard. This new sound ran the walls all at once, 4 sides, claws or nails dragging, set on a rhythm that made my shoulders lift without permission. A circle, then another, faster, then a third. So fast the sound smeared into a rasp that climbed the wood and went around and around until I had to clench my jaw to keep from telling it to stop. "Enough," I said, and the cedar burned brighter in my hand as if it had heard too. All the scratching stopped at once. I stood shaking with nothing to show for it. The wind gusted and backed off. A gray jay clicked its beak twice from a branch like it had been waiting to make sure the test was over. I eased into the trees because the instinct you learn out here is gentle retreat. Don't run. Don't turn your back on the thing you don't understand until there are more trees than questions between you and it. The path back didn't match the path in. That happens sometimes when you're rattled and proud enough not to admit it. I took a line that felt clean and found myself shouldering through a band of young fir too thick to welcome me, then dropping into a shallow swale that wasn't on my map or in my memory. The ground there was soft, hummocked, like something burrowed, and then thought better of it. Under the hummocks, heat lifted barely, the way a loved thing cools slowly after the flame goes out. I stopped long enough to look back. I couldn't see the cabin. I could feel where it was. That's the only honest way to say it. Like a coin you know is in your pocket without touching it. The scratch didn't follow. The silence did. Halfway out, I found sign of the tracker who'd sent me. A clean heel and toe impression in a patch of frozen peat where he'd turned when the smell of smoke first reached him. His steps came within 100 yards of the clearing. Then they veered, long diagonal strides toward a ridgeline that would get him light and a reason to call in. Smart man. I walked beside his ghost prints until the ground went too hard to take them, then let the compass do the rest. By the time I reached Honest Trail, the light had climbed a little as if the sky had remembered we were still alive. My radio, which had been steady but distant all morning, cracked with a weather update and a check-in I should have answered 10 minutes earlier. I thumbed the mic and kept my voice easy. Clearbrook, West Block, no bear sign, minor irregularity, investigating tomorrow, a lie that fits in a log. On the way back to the vehicle, the smell of smoke went with me off and on, like an old song you can't place until the next chorus. Once I caught it strong enough to glance down and see a drift of white on my sleeve, ash as fine as flour. I brushed it away. It stuck to my fingers like pollen and felt warm for the length of a breath. When I looked again, there was nothing on my skin. The station felt strange when I walked in, bright, loud, safe in a way that made me miss the quiet I'd just fled. I hung my jacket on the peg over my locker, and the smoke smell rose out of the fabric like it had been waiting for air to carry it. I stripped the jacket and set it on the bench and stood there with my hands on my knees until the part of me that wanted to shake had decided it could do it later. I didn't put the cabin on any report. I didn't mark the location on any of the maps I keep rolled in the bottom drawer. I made a note for myself in the kind of code rangers use when we need to remember without inviting questions. W block, old smoke, no ingress. Then I folded the note and slid it into the field guide my grandmother gave me, the one with pressed leaves in the back and a grease stain shaped like Wyoming in the front. Sleep didn't come that night. When it did, it came wrong. I dreamed lumber close, salt dry, the taste of resin in my mouth. I dreamed a room without corners. I dreamed a fingernail drawing a line down the inside of a wall and stopping where my hand waited on the other side. When I woke, the cedar bundle on the dresser had burned to a nub. I hadn't lit it. It shouldn't have burned. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that I'd let whatever lived in that clearing go on being alone, and I'd go on being careful. But the park isn't a story that ends when you turn off the lamp. The next afternoon, a tourist wandered into the station and asked about a historic homestead she had stumbled across while looking for birds. She described a cabin so exactly, my teeth hurt to listen. It was old, she said, but so tidy. I walked around it twice and couldn't find the door. Do they paint doors to look like walls for preservation? She said it like a joke. Her hands shook around her paper cup. Where did you see it? I asked. She showed me on the wall map with a manicured nail. She was wrong by half a mile, and she was right in every way that mattered. There was a smell, she added, wrinkling her nose, like a fireplace, but it made me feel sad. She smiled, embarrassed by the word. I took it to my supervisor, and he told me to flag the area for resource protection and visitor safety and seasonal windfall hazards, the kind of phrases that keep lawyers sleepy. I signed the form, logged blocked trail segment, and went to my locker. The jacket still carried the smoke. It would for a week, and then it would stop, and then, sometimes, when I put it on, the smell would come back for 3 breaths and leave. I had one more reason to return. The tracker who'd called in the sign never checked back. He's a quiet man, but he's faithful, and he knows that when you tell a ranger you saw a grizzly's morning, you don't leave him wondering about the afternoon. I left him 2 messages. I hiked the ridge he'd taken. I found the stump he'd mentioned. The ants had already claimed it. I found his boot prints again where frost held their shape. They led me right to the edge of the clearing's influence, where the air thins and the needles shine like varnish, and then they stopped, not turned aside, not scuffed, stopped. I took 2 steps forward and listened. No scratch, no knock. The clearing was empty, the cabin as dull as a shut eye. The air burned my nose with cold and smoke, and something sweet as rot. I placed the cedar on a stump and struck the lighter. The smoke went straight up this time, reluctant to lean. After a minute, the cabin spoke. Not loud, not wood. That breath again, as if something on the other side of the wall was exhaling through its teeth. I know you're there, I said, because a part of me believed manners might count. He's a friend. If you've got him, you can let him go. The sound I heard wasn't laughter, but it lived where laughter does. The scratching came back, slow, patient, the circle smaller this time, like a finger running a groove inside a ring. I left bread on the stump because that's what my grandmother would have done for a hungry thing she didn't want at her door. I tied the cedar bundle to a branch because that's what I would do for a watchful thing I didn't want to anger. I walked out again and didn't lose myself. When I turned at the tree line, I saw something I hadn't seen before, a dent along the base of the western wall, barely a thumb deep, the kind of shallow, rounded impression a forearm might make if pressed again and again against unyielding wood. I haven't taken anyone back. I don't mark the place on maps or show it over coffee with the bravest new hire. I keep the note in my book and the cedar on my belt. If a hiker brings me smoke in their story, I listen. If they draw a square with their hands in the air, I take their name and tell them they saw an old trapper's storehouse from before the park, and it's not safe to approach. They nod. They are happy for an answer that makes the day normal again. I don't tell them that some rooms are thresholds pretending to be rooms, and some wood remembers more than the forest does. If you ever hike the West Block and a breeze carries you a whisper of old ash where there shouldn't be any, don't adjust your course to find it. Don't follow the smell into a tighter weave of trees. And if you step into a clearing you don't remember and see a cabin with no doors and no windows and the roof slouched like a sleeping animal's back, don't lay your hand on the logs. Don't knock. Don't ask who's inside. Because if you find that cabin, you'll hear the scratching, and once it knows where you are, whatever's inside will keep pace with you as long as the wood holds. And there's a kind of winter that never ends in there, a winter that breathes, waiting for friction and warmth and a voice to answer. My name is Caleb Ironcloud, and I've been a ranger in Yellowstone long enough to learn that ash can lie better than any man. The first thing they teach you about fire is how to read its story after it's gone, the way soot ladders a trunk tells you the wind's direction, the spread of blackened needles tells you how fast the crown ran, the color of ash tells you what burned and how hot. White ash is clean bone, gray means moisture, black means the burn never finished what it started. But the thing no one writes in a manual is this: sometimes ash isn't a story about a fire, sometimes it's a trail. This was early November, shoulder season, where the park seems to hold its breath between the last tourists and the first true snow. The sky had that hammered tin look that makes noon feel like dusk. Lodgepole pine held onto its green like stubborn thoughts. The hot ground in the basins breathed in little white threads that vanished as quick as they showed. I'd spent the morning checking closures on the west side, a block of forest that carries the old ghosts of '88 in its bark. Charred snags there lean like old men telling the same story, and the young stands knit so tight you can smell their resin when the wind shifts. Around 2, dispatch pinged my radio, caller near the Gibbon River pullout reporting a smoking line in the woods. Not a campfire, not a stump, a line. The operator asked 3 times and got the same answer: a line of ash, warm to the touch, running between the trees like someone laid out a fuse. The caller wouldn't leave a name. That happens. People breathe strange when something looks at them with a face they can't name. I parked at a small turnout between Grebe Lake Road and the Gibbon, where the river runs black in the shade and the air keeps a cold knife in it even on good days. Frost held in the sedge along the bank, the kind that crunches like paper under your boot. A raven watched me from a snag with that bored, sideways head turn that says you're interesting only until you prove you aren't food. I logged my location, clipped my radio, tightened my gloves in my belt, and stepped off into the lodgepoles. The forest took the sound out of my steps like it always does. I cut north by feel, letting the terrain carry me down a shallow slope to where tree line thinned and a low meadow pushed a finger into the woods. Halfway down, the air changed, one of those shifts you feel in your teeth before you name it. Not warmer, not colder, drier. Like stepping from a humid room into a pantry, the moisture pulled clean out of it. That's when I smelled it. Smoke. Not fresh, not campfire sharp. Old, papery, like an attic where somebody once kept a stove. I slowed. The smell came in a small, steady ribbon from the west. I took 3 more steps and saw it. A line of black ash no wider than the palm of my hand ran between the roots of a lodgepole and disappeared into the shadow of a deadfall. It wasn't a drift or a scatter. It was a line, crisp-edged and even as if laid by a careful hand. It didn't feather into the duff the way ash always does. It sat on top of the forest floor like it had chosen to. I crouched and held my hand over it. Heat. Not the slap you get when you open a hot stove, more like a low fever. The kind of warmth you feel in your palm 20 seconds after a child with a temperature has held your fingers. Every bit of training I have says don't touch. I touched anyway, just my fingertips to the edge. The ash felt soft. My fingers sank a hair into it, like talc that had been just barely dampened and left to dry. When I pulled my hand away, the fingerprint swelled back as if the ash remembered flatness. I followed the line left, just enough to understand its habits. It took the easiest path between obstacles the way water does, but where water would spread, the ash kept its width, bending around roots in a neat curve and returning to straight as if it had rules. It crossed a deer trail without breaking. It slid under the brittle ribs of a fallen branch and came out unruffled. No wind moved it. No breeze even worried the edges. I stood, checked my radio, said, "Ironcloud to base," just to hear a normal human voice. Static chewed the first syllable and then let dispatch in. "Clean, go ahead." Investigating reported ash line west of Gibbon pullout. No active flame. Will advise. I kept my voice even. That's as much for you as it is for them. I palmed the cedar bundle tied to my belt and left it there. Respect doesn't require a fuss. I started walking. The ash ran ahead of me through the lodge poles, always 5 or 10 steps in front, like a ribbon someone was drawing as I moved. I don't mean I watched it lay itself down. I mean that every time I scanned forward to look for it, it was there, the same width, the same calm intention, as if it had always been part of the ground, and I had only just now learned its language. In places, the line had clumped into small knots, the size of a coin. When I crouched to study one, I saw a spiral, not tight, not perfect. 3 turns, set with the care of a child copying a pattern in sand. "Okay," I said under my breath, the way my grandmother taught me to talk to things you don't understand. "I see you." The forest was too quiet. In November, you still get the gossip of chickadees, the coarse throat clears of ravens, the tick of squirrels going about their business. But the air here felt like a church after a funeral, everybody afraid to be the one who speaks first. I put 2 fingers to my neck out of habit. My pulse beat steady. If fear was here, it wasn't mine yet. The line led to the meadow's edge and did something that made my mouth go dry. It crossed a finger of water, a shallow trickle that fed the sedge without smearing. It did not stop at the bank and resume on the other side. It ran straight over. I stepped close enough to watch the place where ash met water. You expect diffusion, black washing into brown, current finding the weak parts and carrying them away. Instead, the thin band looked like it hovered a millimeter above the surface, shadowing the water without touching it. The current slid underneath and kept moving. I could see my reflection's mouth open as if to swallow, and there was nothing to swallow. I stepped over the trickle, careful not to let my boot graze the line. You learn quick in this job that rules make themselves. The ash curled into the meadow grass, and then, oddly, not oddly at all, took the lightly higher ground, as if it didn't like the idea of soaking. The meadow hummocks were stiff with frost, but the path of ash never frosted. It stayed black, and every foot or so, a faint wisp of smoke rose and vanishingly vanished. No column, no drift, only the suggestion that something had just happened and thought better of it. It should have felt ridiculous to follow a dust trail through one of the most unpredictable thermal landscapes on Earth. It didn't. It felt like being led to a door by someone who had already been inside. After 100 yards, the line widened. Not much, maybe from 4 inches to 6. The edges feathered for the first time, and the heat brushed my shins. Ahead, in a small pocket where the meadow dipped and lodge poles crowded the far side, the ash pooled like a puddle. As I approached, I thought it was a circle. I was wrong. It was a body, not flesh, shape, human length, human width, with a suggestion of shoulders and hips, and the kind of gravity a body has when it's been put down and not moved for a long time. The ash lay thickest along the ribs as if something inside had tried to breathe and couldn't decide whether that was a good idea. The head, if you can call it that, ended bluntly, like a face pressed into a pillow and left. I stopped 6 feet back. The air just above the ash shimmered, the way air wiggles over a griddle. No flames, no coals. I told myself I was looking at a trick, the way wind builds drifts that mimic shape, the way our minds fill outlines with what makes the best sense. Then the outline twitched. Not much. A pulse. A small lift and settle, as if a fish had rolled under a sheet. My fingers had the cedar bundle before I remembered reaching for it. I don't light it every time I'm afraid. I light it when I'm afraid in a way that doesn't belong to me. I cupped flame to twig and breathed to bring the smoke. It rose slow and sweet, and then, on a wind I did not feel on my cheeks or hands, it ran straight into the ash. The body twitched again, harder, as if the line running through the meadow had tugged. I spoke without meaning to. "Who are you?" "From the ash." Nothing human answered. The meadow on either side held itself like a man waiting for a verdict. Somewhere beyond the lodgepoles, a raven made a sound I've only heard twice, a soft, surprised talk, like a coin dropped into a full pocket. I eased a step closer and crouched. The heat rose steady, enough to bake my face if I stayed too long, not enough to blister. I held the cedar smoke in front of me the way you hold a clean shirt between you and a door you don't want to touch. The ash moved. A ridge lifted along what would have been the spine. 4 narrow indentations pressed up through the surface along the rib cage, evenly spaced, then released. Again, then a third time, slower, as if whoever was underneath had learned the timing and wanted me to see it. The pattern made something very old in me flinch. I had seen 4 marks in other places in this park, scored into rock, dragged through mud, dented in frost. Folks like me pay attention to numbers. 4 in a line means a hand that isn't ours. My radio hissed, spat, and fell silent against my shoulder. The ash line behind me whispered no sound. Exactly. The thin noise you hear when you put your ear to a shell and realize it's your own pulse telling old lies about the sea. I stood, because we stand when the temperature of a moment changes. "I can get help," I said, and the words came out wrong, not panicked, too calm, like I was repeating something I had been taught to say in a room where everyone's eyes were on me. "If you're injured." The ash body shivered, the head hollowed and rounded like a mouth opening under the sheet. No sound came out, but the meadow felt like it heard one. I took a step back. The ash line that had led me here lifted along its edge, not rising off the ground, exactly rippling, as if something moved fast beneath, gathering itself. The tremor ran toward me, and my body did the math before my mind. The line was coming to close itself behind me. There are rules about circles. The burned tundra up north tells you not to step into one that isn't yours. My grandmother taught me to look for rings of yellowed grass in green fields and to give them the same respect you give a sleeping dog. There, in that meadow with frost kissing the sedge and a knot body warming the air where a body would lie, I felt a new rule being written in my bones. Don't let it close. I moved left, slow, boots sliding through stiff grass. The ash line surged to match me. It didn't lunge. It didn't break formation. It tightened, narrowing the gap to my right. In 2 breaths, I understood I had a choice between stepping over it or letting it finish what it wanted. I picked my spot where the line crossed a patch of wet ground and glossed darker. I lifted my boot and stepped. Heat licked my ankle through the leather like a snake of summer fire. I swore. The ash yielded, a half-inch, and then recovered as if it disapproved of being touched and didn't want to show it. The cedar smoke in my left hand blew flat into my face, though the air all around was still. On the far side of the line, everything felt different, lighter, like stepping out of a cramped sleep into a hallway and finding the door unlatched. I didn't think. I took 3 more steps, then 5. Then I was moving the way you move, when something with rules is trying to write a rule with your name in it. The ash whispered again behind me, a dry sound like paper being folded and unfolded with clean, angry hands. When I turned stupid or brave, I don't know which I saw. The line had indeed drawn a circle where I had been standing. Not perfect, the meadow doesn't love math. It overran its own end by a foot, like a snake that had swallowed its tail and was surprised to find it didn't taste good. The knot body in the center had collapsed a little, the outline losing its confidence. The 4 indentations along the ribs pressed once more and didn't lift. I walked backward until the lodge poles took me in. In their shadow, sound returned. A far raven called a normal, workmanlike croak. The wind found the hem of my jacket and tested it. My radio came alive with the bland comfort of weather. Light snow north entrance by nightfall. Roads may be slick. I tasted ash not on my tongue, but on the thought of my tongue. I kept the cedar burning until I reached true forest again and ground it out on a stone with a thumb that shook once and then learned itself. The path out wasn't the path in. That's fine. I found a game trail and let it carry me to a place my mind could recognize on a map. I crossed the little finger of water. The ash line had not. It pooled on the near bank in a welt of black and then thinned, a thread drawn until it snapped. A single narrow band lay across the water like a hair. When I stepped past it, it lifted without lifting, and my skin crawled in a way that had nothing to do with cold. Back at the truck, the world behaved itself. Keys slid where they should. The engine turned, the windshield fogged and cleared. I sat with my hands on the wheel and studied the half-moon print of ash on my boot where I'd stepped the line. It had a tooth to it, a fine grit that clung. When I brushed it with a gloved finger, it left a clean arc on the leather and a smear on the glove that looked wet and felt warm for a heartbeat longer than it should have. I didn't write trail of ash in the log. I wrote investigated report, no active flame, residual heat, legacy burn, area flagged. That keeps lawyers docile and supervisors uncurious. Then I went home, set my boots on the porch, and told myself I would not dream about human shapes that aren't human. Sleep doesn't take orders. I dreamed the line as a vein, dark under pale skin, pulsing when a heartbeat passed. I dreamed the body as a lesson, breathe in, breathe out, 4 fingers tapping the ribs like a metronome with bad intent. I woke to cold air and the smell of someone else's smoke in my house. The cedar on the dresser had burned to a nub. I hadn't lit it. In the morning, I went back. You can call that stubborn or foolish. Sometimes they are the same. But the tracker in me needed to see if ash trails leave sign when the sun rises and the world pretends it is less strange than it is. The meadow looked like a meadow, frost white, sedge bowing, lodge poles taking the first gray light in the way trees know how to be patient. Where the ash line had run, there was nothing but slightly darker grass, as if a shadow had stalled there and thought better of staying. The place where the knot body had lain showed only a shallow depression, like the bed of an elk that had slept too long. I crouched and ran my hand over the grass. It didn't crumble. It didn't burn. When I lifted my fingers, a blackness so fine I could barely see it filmed the whorls of my prints. It was warm, not for long, long enough. I followed the old line's route back to the forest edge. There, pressed into the damp as if a child had made them and been called to dinner, lay 4 marks in a row, not deep, not dramatic, 4 fingertip impressions the size of an adult's, evenly spaced, no thumb. And beside them, just once, a long, smooth drag the length of my hand, as if a limb had pulled, gathered itself, and decided against leaving a better story. On the way out, a raven paced me in the trees. It flew ahead 50 yards, landed, watched, then did it again. On its third hop, it made the small, surprised talk that had rung my ears the day before. I stopped under it and said, "I know." It tilted its head and shut up, which is all the agreement you ever get from a raven. I didn't tell the other rangers. You start being the guy who sees trails that shouldn't be there, and folks get quiet around their coffee cups when you walk in. I carried the story the way you carry a coal in a pail carefully, not showing it flame or wind. A week later, a volunteer on a bison count mentioned offhand the oddest thing he'd stepped across near Mary Mountain, a line of ash that was warm like a dog and ran like someone laid string. I told him to make sure his boots were dry when he got home. He laughed because he is young. He did not laugh when I kept my face still. Here is what I will put on paper where I can't take it back. If you are walking in this park and you smell old smoke in a place that should be clean, cold, stop and ask yourself who the smell belongs to. If you see a line of ash where ash never falls, a clean, narrow trail in windless air, do not follow it to see where it goes. Ash is for after, trails are for before. This thing is both, and that should be enough to make you leave. And if you find where it leads, if you come into a quiet and there is a shape on the ground the size of a human body, and the air over it wavers like heat on a blacktop in August, do not put your hand out. Do not speak your name. Do not let it make a circle with you inside. Step over the line where water can help you if it still can. Keep the cedar smoke for yourself. Walk out without counting your steps, and do not look back even when something behind you presses 4 fingers into the skin between your shoulder blades. Because some fires don't make ash. Something else does. And sometimes it isn't telling you how the burning ended, it's showing you where it will begin.